Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and today we're going to talk about dragons. You see, dragons are very popular when it comes to Warhammer, and despite the fact that they're a dying race, you can find dragons pretty much anywhere. The High Elves make use of them as the famed dragon riders, the Dark Elves enslave them and corrupt them into, well, black dragons. The Wood Elves make use of them as allies, and obviously we know now of the Carmine Dragons, something which is relatively old yet new in Warhammer Fantasy lore. They command the area known as Grand Cafe, but there are actually many different types of dragons that are relatively unheard of or just extremely rare. We've spoken about a few of them, but in this video we're going to talk about pretty much as many as possible, because dragons are cool and this sounds like a fun idea for videos. I'm actually having a lot of fun just jumping into lore stuff whilst we're waiting for Warhammer 3 DLC. So yeah, let's begin. So we're going to start off with one that is relatively well known because it's made famous by LUSC von Draken. These are the Carmine Dragons. Carmine, or in Carmine Dragons, as they are sometimes known to dark legend, are strange and rare beasts even among their storied kin. They are born, it is said, according to arcane lore, when a dragon lair in which it is spawned has become saturated by Shaiish, the amethyst wind of death, which is gathered and magnified within the heart and soul of the dragon to be born. They are named for their strange and lustrous scales, supple as sin and harder than steel, which begin a deep ruby red when they are young, darkening to a purple so deep as to be almost black as they age. Carmine dragons are sinister, clever, and deadly creatures, and considered to be spectres of death in many ancient tales, and one's appearance in the lore of the dwarfs is always seen as an omen that presages disaster. They are reputed to lair in dark swamps, ancient battle sites, and the ruins of fallen cities, anywhere where death has had its lease on a great scale, for in some way the echoes of destruction are said to feed their power, and the spirits of the dead whisper to them in the darkness. The wrath of a Carmine dragon is truly terrible to behold, and only rarely will they ever submit to an alliance, let alone be ridden, save as part of some dark purpose or design of their own, although if they do, it is usually only to one themselves knowledgeable in dark and arcane lore. So the Carmine Dragon is quite large, even just in its basic form. We know that Carmine Dragons can even grow to the size of Emperor Dragons, these are being the largest dragons that we know of, and they're incredibly rare. In fact, one is under the use of the Empire, again, the dragon that works alongside LUSC von Draken, but even then, LUSC is more neutral than true Imperium. And it kind of links up to how she works in lore. She's an incredibly powerful spellcaster in the Lore of Death. Naturally, the Carmine Dragon is attracted to her because it might see a way to feed off magical energies. Now, this might sound like a normal dragon to you, just with a different wind of magic, because we know most dragons use fire, but it's the fact that some dragons do twist and turn depending on the wind that flows through them. And these dragons themselves might even grow larger than the standard Emperor Dragon should they be undisturbed and not killed. You see, in the Storm of Magic book, we hear of something called a Nightmare Dragon. There's not really a lot of lore here. The Nightmare Dragons are believed not to be real creatures at all, but wild currents of amethyst magic given life. Nightmare Dragons have the same breath weapon as a Black Dragon, but it hits a little stronger. Now, this is really interesting, considering that, well, it's got access to the Lore of Death. It's something which clearly is boosted up by the wind itself, but it doesn't seem linked to the incarnate elemental of death, which we know is quite serpentine. Maybe this is a step forward post Emperor Dragon. I'm imagining that if the Carmine Dragon is rare, the Nightmare Dragon is even rarer, because something of that scope and scale of a creature would naturally be hunted down. But this is the thing, there are so many dragons that we don't really know about, and that's why I want to discuss them today. So the same could be said about the Frost Dragons and the Ice Dragons. We're going to talk about them both together, as they might be linked, one of them being the standard and the other one being the Emperor version. When it comes to the Frost Dragons, we know the following. Frost Dragons are creatures of frost and ice, the chill of midwinter given vengeance and scaly form. They're slow to anger, presumably as a result of their own chill nature being combined with cold-blooded physiology physiology, with the ice dragons being the most sedate and slumbersome of their kind. This is dragons in general, but it's very important to note here, I know a lot of people are going to be saying that Norska has access to frost worms, but worms are not actually dragons when it comes to Warhammer lore. There's something related, but not the same. In fact, some people do believe that frost worms are just the chaotically mutated ice dragons and frost dragons, which have fallen to the influence of the darker powers. And yeah, you know, that actually could happen. Frost dragons have actually been seen in lore before. They've been mentioned in the Ogre Kingdom's book, as the frost dragons will tend to avoid mammoths and rhinoxen and so on, which kind of makes sense. The dragons themselves are more solitary, while a lot of them are seen as quite aggressive. The grand majority of dragons just kind of want to be left alone. Most of them are still slumbering too, so even though there's a fair amount of dragons that we see in battles and just in general through layers, there's actually a lot more hidden beneath the surface. We know that frost dragons and ice dragons can be found around the areas of the Mountains of Morn. In Norska it can also be assumed, and I'm assuming at this point Kislev, seeing as ice and frost, tempest, all that type of stuff is in the land itself. Those types of dragons would likely be attracted to that area. Though, again, very strange that these dragons do use the lore of light. Mind you, the lore of ice was kind of removed at this point, because ice magic was only really used once in a supplement for 6th edition, and then never again. It started returning now because of Total War Warhammer and Warhammer the Old World. Now we're going to go into one that we've discussed in a previous video. It is one of my favorites. These are the Warfire Dragons. Thankfully a rare sight in the old world, Warfire Dragons are hateful and ruinous creatures. Their long, charred black bodies twist and undulate, throwing off distorting patterns of baleful fire as they move, never still, constantly twitching and shuddering as if tortured eternally by unseen blades. Clusters of strange crystals mar their scaled skins, and each individual hosts its own affliction and minor deformities of limb and hue, hinting at their exotic and corrupt origins. The very air around Warfire Dragons throbs with tainted power, shriveling plants and burning the very ground their claws touch. When brought to battle, the energy caged within Warfire Dragons works upon those foes foolish enough to close with them, leaving each a burning carcass in its wake. When unleashed, its breath is like no other dragon's, a coruscating blast of scintillating red-black lightning that burns their victims in an all-consuming flames, scorching even spirits and creatures of magic. Warfire Dragons fuel their destructive power and maintain their tortured bodies by devouring pure warpstone, turning their bodies into vast vessels of arcane power. Only the mighty constitution of a dragon could withstand the effect of so much concentrated energy and chaotic taints without ripping itself to pieces. Although upon their violent deaths, the loss of control often leads to a spectacular and explosive end to these dragons marauding. The scarcity of warpstone in the old world frequently leads the Warfire Dragons into conflict with the Skaven, assaulting their fortresses and digging out their burrows to get to their hoards of the tainted stone, although some will seek out the inhabitants of the Chaos Wastes, or the dark holdfasts of the Restless Dead in search of prey, or at least to devour creatures themselves tainted with foul magics to sustain them. It is also by the promise of this most powerful and most malignant of materials, warpstone, that insane and arrogant wizards bargain with Warfire Dragons for their might in battle, for it is said that these beasts are too quixotic and factious even for the great binding scrolls to alone contain, while their strange hunger to some points to their true origin, the blasted southern wastes of chaos, a region legendarily inhabited by demons littered with the warpstone-laden debris of Morrslieb's birth. No Warfire Dragon has ever been sighted by any that have survived that rivals the great size of the old world's Emperor Dragons, though such monstrous creatures may exist somewhere in the tactless and unknown southern wastes. While the myths so far, Cathay holds tales of demon dragons of the south, which may be one and the same to them. Some scholars theorize that some blasted region far away from the sight and knowledge of man may be dominated by these great worms, growing to such massive proportions on the glut of unharvested warpstone that they may rival the legendary Kalgalanos the Black in size. If this were true, it would explain why many of the younger Warfire Dragons make their long and arduous migration to the Old World, escaping a land ruled by these terrifyingly powerful creatures. So yeah, Warfire Dragons are pretty cool. It's very important to note that these are not Chaos Dragons. Chaos Dragons are usually possessed or mutated in a different way, whereas the Warfire Dragons are mutated because of the touch of Warpstone itself. We do get rules on smaller ones, we get rules on the standard Drakes, and then obviously the Emperor Dragon. So it's really curious. The problem is, not many people go to the Southern Chaos Wastes. Archeon went down there for a little bit, and even then he was only dealing with the Beastskin. So it's something that I'd love to see explored. I would definitely love to see, say for example, Cubicle 7 do a little bit of some source material regarding the Southern Chaos Wastes through Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, as yeah, I'd love to know what's happening there. The Southern Chaos Wastes are perhaps one of the most mysterious places for me in Warhammer Fantasy lore. So this one's a very unknown one. It was only mentioned in a short story called Blood and Sand, I think around 2006. This is the Sand Dragon, which are native to the areas of Araby. It's the Great Desert. We don't know too much about them, and this is a massive shame. Other than the fact that they have serpentine bodies, their scales are usually colored in the same color as sand, and that allows them to hide from their prey, and they can breathe hot sand on their enemies, which is something a lot of people kind of speculated. It's one of these things that this literally only has like 4 lines of lore, 5 lines. The book itself isn't really that big, it's just like a short story. There's no artwork on the dragons either, which is a shame, but it's good to know that there are many, many different types of dragons littering the Warhammer Fantasy world, and we're just not seeing them. Hopefully in the future we will. Storm Dragons is something that we need to talk about. You see there's 2 versions here, the Storm Dragon and the Great Storm Dragon. Let's talk about the Storm one first. Storm Dragons are rarely encountered at ground level, for they love to swoop and dive through the heart of the mightiest thunderstorms. This builds up crackling electric charge upon the dragon's azure scales, which it then can spit as a ball of lightning. The Great Storm Dragons are wild and unpredictable, striking without warning from a clear sky. So the normal Storm Dragons like to hide within thunderstorms, whereas the Great Storm Dragons, which I'm assuming would be like an Emperor Dragon, would actually find themselves a little bit more willing to be in plain sight. I guess it's because they're so immensely powerful. We do know that the Greater Storm Dragons also know how to use the Law of Heavens, and what I find really interesting here is obviously there is another Storm Dragon. We have the Storm Dragon, but that's a title. That's Meow Meow, you know, Meow Yin from Grand Cafe. But they're not related. It's a title compared to a species. I like the idea of Storm Dragons, especially dragons using the Law of Heavens. They're great to fight against demons, for example, or undead. Yeah, super cool. Okay, we're going to go into another really cool one that a lot of people were expecting in Total War, but sadly we didn't get. This is the Magma Dragon. Primordial and vicious creatures, Magma Dragons are amongst the most malignant and reclusive of their kind. Squat, heavily armored monsters whose bodies radiate foul heat and whose obsidian claws can split stone with ease. They dwell in the volcanic ranges of the Darklands and the shattered smoldering peaks of the Black Spine Mountains, and have long become one with their fiery environment, venturing forth from their smoke-filled dens only to hunt. Their favored prey is great beasts such as Manticore and Chimera, although they will deign to devour the flesh of lesser creatures such as elves and men if they must. Only when the storms of magic rage, or they arrogantly wish to avenge themselves on some perceived slight, do Magma Dragons come forth to slay and destroy. One such Magma Dragon was Hagdar, Scourge of the Darklands, who is one of the oldest dragons to exist in that desolate and polluted wasteland. Once a fire dragon, he was taken captive many centuries ago by the Chaos Dwarfs of the Tower of Gorgoth, binding him securely with chains made from enthralled iron. The Sorcerer Lords turned him into a living vessel capable of sustaining possession by a demon, their experiments undoubtedly a forerunner to those who would eventually create the Chaos Dwarf Kadai. Hagdar eventually escaped his bounds and wreaked a terrible vengeance upon the Chaos Dwarfs, destroying much of the Tower of Gorgoth Morgoth and its surrounding slave encampments in a ferocious assault. The Magma Dragon is rarely seen now, and only ventures forth from his lair below the Ashwitch Mountains when challenged by some rival beast or summoned to war by mighty wizards. When he does fly forth, the Chaos Dwarf patrols who keep a wary eye on him have observed that his once white-hot flesh is now turning in places to grey, lifeless stone. It will be many years before the terrible curse he shares with the sorcerers of that dark race subsumes Hagdar completely, but until then, the massive slave caravans replenishing Gorgoth's still depleted workforce continue to stay well clear of his lair. So, Magma Dragons themselves are former dragons. They're still dragons, but a new type of species which were pretty much created by the Chaos Dwarfs. We know that they suffer the same curse as the Chaos Dwarfs themselves, which is kind of interesting, and there are 4 known types: the Young, the Standard, the Great, and the Emperor. So there are a lot of Magma Dragons potentially flying out there. They are breeding and they are bolstering their numbers, but that's pretty much all we know, unfortunately, so far. Who knows what others may be around the area, but super cool. I mean, they look awesome, and that's the most important thing, right? It's one of the more unique looking dragons in Warhammer Fantasy. And lastly, we're going to talk about the Shar Dragon, another really cool one. Deep beneath the mountains of the Old World dwell the creatures known to myth as Shar Dragons. Enormous serpentine beasts, Shar Dragons prowl the black depths of the world, stalking their prey in the abject darkness, pulling themselves silently over rock and shale on disturbingly prehensile sickle-clawed arms. Their pale flesh is covered by long jagged scales, each razor-edged and wickedly pointed. Coated in blood and decaying viscera, these protective plates are as much a weapon as a defense, slicing flesh and puncturing the armor of those foolish enough to confront such creatures in battle. These subterranean terrors are renowned amongst the dwarves for their stubborn, unyielding ferocity, and against their bestial kind are many entries in the Great Book of Grudges lodged. Roll credits, I guess? Shar Dragons will attack almost anything they encounter, from the hulking white bloated fungoid slugs that swim the lightless seas of the Under-Earth, something that we'll talk about in the future, to the heavily armored dwarf mining crews that brave the deeps in search of Gromril, and they lay waste to all. If any Shar Dragons manage to break into the subterranean domains found closer to the surface, be they of dwarf, skaven, or goblin construction, they will wreave bloody murder and glut themselves on flesh until slain, or they slink back into the depths with their bellies full. Creatures as much living nightmare as bestial predator, they are those lore masters that claim that Shar Dragons are not true dragons as such, but the devolved remains of some draconic offshoot that migrated into the dark heart of the world. Untold centuries in the lightless Umbra have filled them with malign power and distorted their forms, and some are now venomous enough that they burn the very rock beneath them, while others are able to exhale the vaporous essence of soul-destroying terror to silently slay their prey. And should they be overmatched and injured, the Shar Dragon will explode in a murderous rage that few creatures can survive. It was the dwarfs that first returned these creatures to the light of the sun, having learned to bind Shar Dragons with powerful runic collars and turning them upon their foes to rend and tear. Learning of their power, ambitious wizards, now long dead, soon created binding scrolls so that they too could harness the Shar Dragon's strength. Again, another very cool creature. There were loads of really interesting monsters that were introduced during Forge World's time for Warhammer Fantasy. It's a massive shame that a lot of them had artwork and just no model. But you never know with the future, with Warhammer the Old World coming hopefully soon, there's chances to revisit loads of things that were established in lore, like many of the dragons that we've seen here, and possibly some more, you never know. But what do you guys think about these dragons? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and let's start a bit of a discussion. Are there any that I might have missed? I know some people might say sea dragons, but in all honesty, sea dragons are quite commonly known, mostly because of the whole situation with the Black Ox kind of being pulled by them. But have a great day, guys, and I'll see you all again very, very soon.